Yeah, so I think we've got sort of a coin and token hangover to some extent, and that has a lot to do with. I guess it has a lot to do with the market. Obviously, has taken a downturn. The frothiness that we sort of experienced about a year and a half ago is obviously now settling to the bottom of the pan. But that doesn't indicate that there's not a huge amount of stuff going on behind the scenes for projects that indeed are valid and effectual projects that make a difference. And any project that is doing that is probably, presenting to bodies like yours and on panels like these to talk about what they're up to. With respect to coins specifically, I see coins at least as more of as a utility sort of feature. They're sometimes needed, oftentimes they are not needed, and I think knowing the difference is pretty important.
Cool. Yeah, so we can get into some of those details. Just quick. Go down the line.
Yeah. Matt Rushka, Kuchava Exchange, spoke to you guys a little bit before. So I think I even mentioned hybrid model associated to payments done in fiat, regular currency. The token is at least offered for incentive associated to running those nodes. So very much of that incentive model in regards of creating that decentralized type of node structure.
Yeah, I'm Lorraine with Blockchain for Media. I think we have chosen the route. There's enough confusion in the ad industry and in the programmatic chain that, and the need for speed and transaction speed, that we've chosen to use a blockchain technology that doesn't have anything to do with crypto. I mean, one of the first things I will say when people say, what do you do? It's like, well, what's blockchain? It's like, it's not crypto. Okay, so
thanks,
I'm here kind of as the advocate for, our technology is interoperable with any other coin-based system that someone may want to use to reward. I mean, we could do that at some point, but right now we're trying to solve the big problems that are glaring out there. So that's our position.
I'll do it. All right. David James, I work at Big Token. I spoke earlier as well. I agree, I think, with the entire panel in terms of consumers or validation needs to be rewarded for the work that they're doing. So there is a need somewhere within there to reward people within tokens. Us as a publicly traded company, we didn't go down that route. We thought about that. It's not something that's not potential in the future. But for us, it was not a necessity. Utilizing blockchain we wanted to have that transparency, but the coinage wasn't. And I think it had a lot to do with maybe the hangover appeal of the market as well.
Thanks, everyone. So I just want to make a few assertions before we get into some questions. And I think we're not going to focus this session on a lot of the legal and regulatory stuff that's happening. We've got a good session for that at the end of the day. Nice legal view for the final session, which I'm sure you'll enjoy. So I think we certainly, on our preparation for this, we wanted to make sure that it was clear what use cases. And at the beginning of today, we shared the general use cases for blockchain and for the capabilities that blockchains bring forward. But we on this group really have centered around one use case around fraud, because it seems to be the one that's bubbled to the surface for at least everybody here. While there are others, and I think we'll jump into them if we get time. But I think it's really, Lorraine already mentioned, it's really important to understand that we are not trying to do kind of basic education around what blockchains are in this session. We're not trying to explain cryptocurrencies versus blockchain uses, but we are focused on tokens and potential pros and cons for tokens and coins concepts, right? The jointly incentivized ecosystem, if sometimes it's called that, the incentivized to act as in an ecosystem, essentially the consensus mechanism, those aspects are what we're trying to kind of dig under the surface of. So if you've got questions around that stuff, that's really interesting for us on this panel. But I will make just one more statement. I think that there's another part to that, which is the governance, often called governance, which is frankly, in an industry where there's already some governance existing, is a part that's challenging. And I think we want to dig a little bit into the transfer of the governance from the current way it's working, or maybe not in a lot of cases, to the way that we see it working in this with this new technology. So I'm gonna kick off by touching on like, what aspects of this idea of governance stroke or jointly incentivized while you were assessing whether you to use a token and how you might or may not use a token were interesting and still retain in somewhere in your platforms or retain in somewhere in your company? I'll throw it to anyone who is willing to answer.
Well, for us, I mean, the governance comes from sort of the tokenomics of what's going on. I think they have to kind of act in concert. The publisher and advertiser will each be running a validator node. There's got to be 2/3 agreement on the validator node. So obviously, if we only have a publisher and an advertising running a node, then they both have to have some agreement. If we have multiple publishers running lots of third-party nodes, there's got to be agreement on whatever happened between them was supposed to happen. And the tokenomics between them all have to be aligned. So you really have to work before you start, or maybe in our case, to some extent, while you started coding. Sometimes you have to go back to the drawing board and say, actually, this isn't going to work because the kind of game theory behind it isn't right. And you have to make sure that the incentives between whatever the sort of governance model or validation scheme that you're cooking up is going to be complementary and dovetailing with your tokenomics. It's kind of my like general idea about it. I don't know if.
And one thing, we do have that hybrid model type of perspective, and one thing I keep coming back to, at least an incentive, is removing that central entity, removing that central decision maker, right? So without that person, why should I run a node? Why should I use compute power associated to validating these transactions? If I can give you something in return, right, and you're still just validating those transactions or saying, yes, this is a valid impression against insertion order X or Y, it allows that to be actually decentralized versus just running consensus nodes in AWS or Azure, or wherever, right? So it really creates that decentralized aspect, and people want to passively earn by validation versus just the centralized entity running these nodes in the cloud that could be changing code out on the back end, something along those lines.
But just make a quick point. So both of those points were very much the business actors inside the ecosystem, right? So there's obviously a consumer. There's thoughts about the consumer being incentivized and being part of this token economics. Like I guess you've got an opinion on that,
yeah,
but I think that's an important aspect to this, and I think I just want to delineate between those two for the audience, right? We're not just incentivizing. I think a lot of what we've agreed here today, or certainly in the group we agree on a regular basis, is that we haven't necessarily done the right thing by all of the actors in the ecosystem, not just the business actors in this ecosystem, right? So consumers being a bigger and bigger part of that, as you see with what's going on with Privacy Chain and some of the other initiatives. So anyone got some opinions there you want to share about your decision around incentivizing consumers?
Yeah, absolutely. So I just speak loud. Okay. Can you guys hear me in the back? You okay in the back? Okay, perfect. Yeah, I think when we first started building out Big Token, the idea was giving a stored value for a consumer. So an individual can get rewarded for their digital identity, for their data. So the idea of a big token was where we first initially started. That was how coins and tokenization took place for us. Eventually, I mentioned before during my presentation, eventually from a publicly traded company, and tokenizing assets became very challenging, but we still wanted to make sure that a consumer was getting rewarded for their digital identity, for their data. So the idea of tokens is where we first initially landed on the ability to say, all right, well, I'm going to reward you a big token that is going to have a redeemable value for you, whether we turn it into a security within security exchange, and they could do that, or what we ended up doing now, which is a sort of a point structure where there's a trust or moving into a security, an actual brokerage-based security, right? So.
Yeah, and
I wanted to give Lorraine a chance to respond, but maybe as far as the reconciliation aspect's concerned, that's very close to your heart, obviously, blockchain for media. So how did that influence that part of your decision making?
Yeah, absolutely. I would just say the one thing that, and I know there's another session on reconciliation after this, so I don't want to talk too much about that. But yeah, the ability to have that handshake agreement. I mean, and because we integrate AI with machine learning to detect the fraud piece of it, so that there's then that handshake, but we have to check, is it a real human? Is it a real website? Is it a real ad that should be served? Was it the real size? Because we have 5 levels of viewability. So having all of those factors agreed upon, by, an unbiased, like, we don't care. I mean, we do care. We want to eliminate the fraud, but it's not, us documenting it and providing it back to the advertisers so they know that they are getting what they're paying for, is really, the kind of the governance over keeping people honest in what they're doing with running ads or trying to spoof things. So just, opens up a lot of transparency that wasn't there before.
I think governance is almost like fundamentally an identity problem, in the sense that if you especially from the user consumer side, so if you don't know, and we don't even have to be talking about advertising or marketing, we could be talking about trying to vote, for example, on the blockchain. So if we don't know, the identity of the actors in the system, then we can't validate whether or not, the whatever governing decisions are getting made are true, right? And a big problem when it comes to, digital advertising and digital and advertising events and things like that is that there's not much difference, and increasingly this is the case, between a human and a bot, what they can do on a computer, online, or on the internet. So identity is really, I think, a central issue to governance, and if you can solve, that identity issue, then I'll come work for you, probably.
Reputation and identity.
Yeah,
too.
yeah.
And I think that's a huge one. I think, how often does like a 5-star, 4.5-star influence what you do on a daily basis? If you're on Yelp or if you're on, really anything, are you going to choose something with a 1 star? No. How can identity and that reputation associated to those previous actions within blockchain allow those individuals, whether it's consumers, whether it's businesses, make those decisions that's going to benefit them in the long run?
So I want to just focus that question back on what the potential uses of a token versus sort of tokenized ecosystem and use of blockchain versus like the current technologies concerned, because we've not really been able to incentivize this joint ecosystem with the current architecture. We see that there's a future, but we're all not using, like, every single one of the companies here is not really using a fully incentivized tokenized ecosystem. There's no real end-to-end yet, and I think that's partly, my belief is that's partly because of the points you just made around identity not being there and so on and so forth. But the question is, let's in an ideal state, right? What are the key advantages of using those a tokenized or a coin base that we need to maintain in order to, when we do transition to a world where those places exist, where we can actually, where it could be true. So my question is a bit, I think I'd like to kind of direct it at Kochava, because you've built the end-to-end,
yep.
Right? And so you know how you're incentivizing everyone in that ecosystem, and I think everyone else is a little bit kind of on toe in, right?
Yeah,
so if you could talk a little bit about that, I think it'd be helpful.
It comes down to loyalty and incentive, right? These tokens and coins aren't necessarily something that's it's new associated to blockchain, but like rewards-based consumer actions aren't really that different. Why do I use a specific Chase credit card? It's because I earn those airline points. Why do I use specific, whatever the case is, a bank account? Because they're offering me that incentive to join. So all we're really doing is creating that loyalty program. When it comes down to decentralizing or creating that decentralized ecosystem, I want someone to run a node and have a great identity and have a good reputation. They're getting paid for it. And after a period of time, they are going to be loyal to that. If the node goes down or there needs to be an update, they want to continue to earn. Same thing with my Chase credit card and earning airline points. Without a decentralized ecosystem, that's where you're taking out, you're essentially just placing that centralized database in there and allowing to make those decisions. Whether they are across nodes or on AWS, whatever the case is, they're still communicating, but you still don't have that true decentralization like I think we all want to have, because then governance is associated to the code, the standards within the code, versus a malicious player potentially making some wrong decisions in there.
Yeah, I actually think that the biggest selling point to marketers for employing blockchain to try to help you out, at least in the near term, it's really reconciliation in my mind. Like I think that's the most obvious selling point to me, and yeah.
So let's touch briefly on this, the real value that we're presenting. I think we talked a little bit about the real value we can provide consumers with loyalty schemes, so on and so forth. But let's talk about the brands themselves, the ones who are putting money into the ecosystem, right? You see the value. You've just touched on the value being fixing a previous problem. Is there any other areas where this token coin concept can really provide value to a brand?
Well, I'll take it. I think there's definitely possibility, like basic attention token is neat. I'm not trying to like throw shade at them or anything like that, but I think not having browser agnosticism is probably not the greatest route. That's just my personal opinion. Some people will say, no, man, that's the way you do it, because that's the way you can kind of in a way ensure identity, is if you keep that all in the browser. But basic attention token is neat because you can be rewarded for your attention. And to your point, Richard, about users in this system and how they've been getting fleeced. Just me personally as a user, like I haven't been on Facebook for 9 years now, but when I was like, I don't like the fact that I'm basically the product. I'm not sure I like it, but I also have to counterbalance that with the idea that sometimes I really like to see ads that I didn't expect, and they gave me that was really cool. I didn't know gravity blankets existed, and I feel so safe under this gravity blanket.
This is true, yes. I also feel safe on gravity blankets. It wasn't advertised to, but yeah. So does anyone else want to contribute to that question?
Well, I think there's an element of, I mentioned it during my presentation, right? That's literally burning the entire bridge of the ecosystem that we've built and said, all right, well, we're going to start from scratch, right? Because you have a closed ecosystem. It's very Apple-esque, right? So you say, all right, everything that happens on this browser, we're going to reward those users for the attention. The advertisers have to buy the basic attention token to be able to then put the advertisement on there. It becomes great if the entire ecosystem were ready and moving that direction. I don't personally believe that maybe we will eventually. Maybe some advertisers are taking that step to do that. I don't see the market ready. I don't see a CMO coming out and saying, all right, I'm going to turn my $1 million into basic attention tokens and then serve that ad that I'm going to do. Maybe they're happening. I don't know, because I don't pertain to their financials. But that's the biggest challenge I see. But you're right. I think that doing something like that, where you burn it and start all over again, is the only way you're going to be able to do that.
It's an interesting point that you brought up, turning fiat currency into tokens, and that's something that I think we battled with pretty consistently. There was conversation about using stable tokens like a USDT. There was conversation about USDC. Everything all these new stable coins that are coming up. I still think it's too early, and I don't know how close everyone follows the news, but USDT just came out that they're only 83% backed. So for every USDT, only 83% essentially had that dollar that was backed. So we're still kind of experiencing some of those issues associated to early industry, and I don't want to say scams, but just a business that started so early and they just got way over their heads, and now they're trying to catch up. And I think, eventually will it be a stable coin type of element associated to buying media? why not? As long as they're proven, as long as they have the backing and they're transparent about that, there is an element of that makes sense. But until they're proven, until they're open and honest, and there's a lot of concern associated to just tokenization or true token economy, if you would.
Yeah, I think we need to make it basically invisible to the user, and by user I mean publisher, advertiser, just invisible. Like nothing will change. Yeah. The only thing that changes is that exactly what you're going to be getting, or you have a much better idea of what you're going to be getting. Yeah,
and I think what's underlying that challenge that you both brought up there is the general FX problem that exists. Right? If you're going to have to be transferring one token or one system into another system, you're adding another level of complexity to an already complex into problem. So the on ramp to this technology being more of a practical current workflow integration seems to be where everyone's kind of saying that's how we're onboarding, even if there is underlying some kind of token economics that exist in one area or maybe two. Right? That seems to be where we've landed in the last year or two, at least, in this industry.
Yeah, and just to your point about fiat being important to be able to use and not having to use cryptocurrency. Right now, the state of the art. There's a few projects around that are doing fiat to crypto on ramping. That's trying to be basically invisible. I know of one because I invested in it, and it's in Europe, but they're able to do it in their jurisdiction because I think UK has some different rules about it. So I don't that may be coming to the fore in the near term, where fiat to crypto on ramping is just super easy, and you just receive the fiat from your client or whatever, your user. And they don't really see what's happening on the back end of that. It just gets converted and then it goes into your system and blah, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, I actually have a question for the panel for that one. I mean, I think in my own platform is rewarding a consumer, right? We're saying, hey, you as a consumer are getting paid big token, you can redeem that for cash. My question always comes around, in our industry, when you're talking about tokenization, rewarding the vendor for protecting against fraud, rewarding the vendor who's protecting against a bad actor as far as a publisher. I think that's where I struggle with understanding really how we utilize coins within our marketplace to assure that the players that have the answers are coming to the table and saying, hey, you're buying fraud, or you're buying a bad publisher, or you're buying bad data. How do we do that if we're going to utilize blockchain and coins and things like that? And that's where I struggle with how we get there, opposed to going back to the basic tension, like burning it all down and go, all right, we're going to do it all, right?
I'll just speak. I think the whole token thing within buying your media with crypto is 5 years out on a good day, 10 years reality. I mean, I've been in the media industry for like 30 years. So I started client side and then went agency side. So, I mean, I just don't see, I mean, it's a thought that, oh yeah, if this was working and, in place, if people were using crypto to buy their media, then it would be, yeah, this is a logical way. We'll give you a cut on or you get a bonus media dollar or percentage or something because you're running clean media. But we're just not there yet. I mean, I was even just thinking to your point of like the question around consumers and their data. If we think about it, I think we are at an apex with consumers, just the same way we are in this programmatic digital media buying space. Consumers have had it. I mean, if you look at how many ad blockers, I spoke with someone who developed actually the biggest ad blocker product in the world. I mean, he's part of rocket science, and the other day, and I mean, consumers' trust has to be won back, and so just slipping it over to, oh, we're going to give you tokens now to, or, I mean, it's going to have to be an invisible, which is, again, another, I mean, I have this love-hate relationship with advertising where it's like, there's capitalism is good in so many ways, but at the same time, it's so deceitful in other ways, where you find the Facebook where, all of our data was sold, for the election. I mean, it's like, there's this yin and yang. So I think we have to be really conscious of what we're doing from both. We're trying to bring transparency into the media buying space. So, how do you do that with consumers and have them understand what's going on? Because right now they're slowly waking up. Like, wait a second, I don't want somebody stalking me because I went and looked at this pair of shoes and I bought them and now I'm getting hounded for the next 6 months and I already bought the shoes. You know what I mean? So I think we're at that apex on both sides that, kind of a sensitive place where we need to be really smart about what we do and how we do it.
Yeah, and agreed. And I'm just wondering for the crowd here, who else, and maybe for the panel too, who else has had that really like creepy ghost in the machine experience of you've been talking about something, you haven't searched for anything, you've just been talking about something, maybe with, partner, spouse, friend, and it literally shows up on an ad, and that's creepy. I don't know if I think people are really creeped out by that. What's that? Yeah. Yeah, it's just I totally echo that sentiment. It's just
I've got a few more questions here, but I'm gonna see if there's anything that this has sparked questions from the audience. Even if you're just gonna, there's one.
Just wondering if we're kind of creating a whole, like literally reinventing the wheel, right? With all of these different networks that are creating incentives for consumers, or doing whatever it is, like for the publishers, and just creating a whole new landscape that is now existing on blockchain. And it kind of, I don't know, it just feels like, with privacy and the necessity for consent and the necessity for logins and security and all that sort of stuff, I feel like we're just kind of crowding the marketplace again with a tyranny of choice for the consumers to now have to navigate through, like, which network should I be a part of, and the publishers as well, right? Which network should I sign on to? Is it just kind of like I don't know, it feels like we're just reinventing the landscape again. I don't know.
I mean, to a certain extent it is. I mean, it's an extension, and if this model works, how will that transition go, right? From a consumer perspective, I mean, they're not really participating at will in their current system. They'll download an app and it's monetized, right? And they're not really getting paid out on that. There are models, of course, that would reward them in the old ecosystem, in this ecosystem now. But I think it's, at what benefit are we going to be gaining? Whether it's efficiency associated to the advertiser or the publisher, is it more transparency? I mean, the hope that at least I have is this new ecosystem or blockchain would provide us that efficiency or lack of clarity that we currently have. So will it become better associated to the consumer? Maybe it's more relevant targeted ads, maybe it's more efficient, maybe it's handling identity in a better regard, right? If they're not directly affected with payment, the hope would be at least it's more efficient for them. But
I think it's an important point, but you have to understand. I think that you come with this perspective that the World Economic Forum believes that 20% of all GDP is going to be stored in blockchains by 2020. When you think about that perspective, broader than advertising, right? It's a fundamental shift in the way that digital value is transferred, right? So it's not so much a perspective of we are creating this thing that's not necessary, right? It's that it's changing, right? So the technology capabilities are changing, and that's a fundamental re-architecture of the way that the web and associated technologies are being made up. So I do agree that there's a danger that it could become another Lumascape, but there's got to be there's absolutely got to be incremental value that's created by doing that. It's not just replacing the current architecture the way it is today. It doesn't make sense. Right, I mean, we're not talking about advertising, we're talking about industry and all digital, not just media and advertising. Go ahead.
So, I get to ask a question to a panel. One thing I've been thinking about this quite a bit, and instead of handing somebody some crypto tokens that they may or may not know how to use, I mean, how close are we to somebody else taking advantage of that crypto and turning around and saying, hey kid, do you want a free phone? And that way they're getting advertising and supporting a free phone. You're already in a situation where in certain markets your average Android low-level smartphone is like $50 or less. So that being driven by just simple advertising is a model, and then the capture on that is going to be through the phone provider.
That's happening.
Yeah.
There's players out there already. There's a free phone, free mobile or something like that. Literally, you get a phone, you have to watch an ad, you get banners put up within your different apps that you're in, and that's paying for your service. I don't think it's not tokenized yet. But that's a good question.
How you define? I think what you've got to understand is. Right.
You can get, they just launched this, they're now like giving grants out to people of BAT, and pretty soon they'll start running advertising that you can get BAT in exchange for.
For their phone?
For watching. No, like the Brave browser.
Yeah, that's exactly,
So I think so. We need to extend the definition of what value is. We need to extend the definition of what a token is or a coin, and where that's used in both consumer to business and business to business. Right, that's really the landscape we're talking about.
But
Right?
if you do that, right, the audiences that could be abused by that system are pretty obvious, right? Talking low income, young.
Aren't they being abused already? Leveraging their data without their consent knowledge anyway? I mean, just turning it into a crypto, is that really abusing, or just another means
Or
to
make it more targeted.
Yeah.
More diminished. Is it worse?
Thanks, Michael.
I think
It's
people are. I
interesting.
think people are enterprising, so they'll find all sorts of ways to try to get what they want. I guess going back to your point, Miss, about is this kind of just, I don't know, dressing up something that is already kind of working? And I have a little bit of a provocative answer, which is that I can't. I imagine, actually this is true. I remember my dad saying, like, why would I send an email? Like, I can literally just like throw it in an envelope. And that's not to say that there's a direct correlate between these two technologies, or one's way more or less advanced than the other. But I think that technology moves faster than adoption, like, all the time. And maybe we're a little ahead of the wave, maybe not, but
Consumers, like the Brave thing, right?
yeah.
So the consumers, at some point, for the industry, just for the advertising industry, there's got to be a law of diminishing returns. If the consumer is sitting there getting now compensated by Brave, compensated by networks like Freckle, like the different networks that exist, it just seems that at some point, are we paying the consumers now? Like, are we cannibalizing our own dollars just to placate the consumers in this cluttered environment? Like
Are we cannibalizing it, or are we making sure that it's not fraudulent, that it's real, that it's not? So I think there could be, absolutely, we could be cutting away the dollar that we're trying to spend, but the exact opposite is that you're more efficient because you're not getting fraud, you're not getting bad actors or bad publishers or all those things, and you're rewarding that consumer with paying them to make sure that it is good, valid data, that they're in market, that they're giving consent. So I think it's the opposite. I don't think we're losing money, or in fact, you're going to be more efficient with paying that consumer.
Yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, not to mention any kind of machine learning on the back end. I mean, I know a lot of the stuff that we look at Kochava in terms of like how we detect fraud is exactly that. How do we get people to physically click on ads and get, like in an application and understand what is equal to a valid install? There's some of our studies, or some of just the signals that come through our system in general. 20 clicks to install an app. What? 20 clicks? Like that doesn't make any sense. And that kind of information associated to, maybe it is a Brave browser, something along those lines, could provide a lot of information in regards to how they're building the business to mitigate fraud, or how we just see that as an industry.
And I'm very laudatory of Lucidity and their project, because they've really kind of laid it out in that report that they put together, which I ended up doing some background work on all of you before today. So I was doing some of my homework, but I read their report, and I thought, well, this is the downstream effect of having higher quality ads with better targeting, non-creepiness is going to be ultimately better for everyone, right? You may pay a little more as a marketer or advertiser, but you're going to be also getting more, I think is the idea, right?
on that note, I'm going to wrap up this session and move on to the next. So thanks very much to the panel, and